Tonight on Bridge City News, Lethbridge City Manager to draft a bylaw that would make mask wearing mandatory. New changes coming to EMS 911 dispatch. And parents are concerned about insufficient safety measures for the classroom.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Good evening, I'm Loris Alexander. Thank you for joining us. If you're making your way to City of Lethbridge facilities, you'll need to have a face mask or a face shield. Jessica Deacon-Rogers is the program coordinator at the Helen Schuler Center, and she says they will not be providing face masks for customers. They are encouraging nature lovers to bring their own.
So this Friday, if people are coming to visit inside our building, we will be asking people to wear some sort of facial covering. So it can be a mask, it could be a face shield as well. We'll have people put masks on before they come into the building and then wear them during their visit throughout the facility, and then they can remove them when they go back outside if they choose to do so. So we will be asking people to bring their own masks. I think it's becoming much more common to have a mask just because they are becoming more commonly worn in lots of different places. And so yes, if people are able to provide their own masks, that is preferred.
Lethbridge City Council has asked the city manager, Craig Dalton, to draft a bylaw that would make mask wearing mandatory in all public places in Lethbridge. The bylaw will be shown to council for consideration tomorrow, August 10th. Many municipalities in southern Alberta, including Lethbridge, are not happy with Alberta Health Services. Mayors from Red Deer, Calgary, and Wood Buffalo joined Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman to express frustration with the new EMS 911 dispatch moving from city-led to AHS-run services. The move is expected to cut $6 million in cost, but the AHS says that saving money was not their intent for the move.
We need to have a fundamental understanding that there is concern. We understand that there is concern, but really what we're changing here is who is processing the EMS call. There's no change in the 911 system. There's no change in the software or the processes that are in place today. It will simply mean that an Alberta Health Services EMS, Emergency Communication Officer, will be now processing EMS calls.
Current 911 dispatch wait times in Lethbridge are roughly 60 seconds, which includes emergency response and transfer, while the AHS target is 30 seconds longer at 90 seconds. It is no secret that parents have had mixed emotions about sending their kids back to school this fall. BCN's Jeanette Roche spoke with one parent who is not satisfied with the province's measures of safety in the classroom and choosing to continue homeschooling until better practices are put in place.
Right here, start. Christina Esiche helps her 6-year-old son Andrew with an arts and crafts project. It's just one of the many activities and assignments she's had to design for him since COVID-19 closed schools last March.
I mean, it was abrupt, obviously, and it took a lot of changes, and we just sort of adapted together to figure out what we were going to do.
But Esiche isn't complaining. She says she's going to continue to homeschool her 2 school-aged kids this upcoming school year. Much of her decision stems from her dissatisfaction with the province reopening schools and the measures they're taking, or not taking in her case, to practice safety.
The idea of masks is great. In public, we do it. But I think all day at school is just unrealistic and sort of unfair and sort of counterintuitive to the safety of the health. And then also there's no cap on class sizes, so that doesn't make much sense either. To me, I don't feel comfortable with it. I just don't. So I think it's best to keep them home, at least for the year.
A student herself working towards a master's degree, Esiche was doing online school herself. She says she realizes this isn't necessarily a decision every parent can make or would want to make.
Because it's so unknown, it made me really uncomfortable. Sending children back into an environment that is heavily stressed. It's not fair to the students or the teachers. And for the boys, it's been really nice to be home with them and see them, feel comfortable.
For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Roche.
This year marks the 21st anniversary of the Lethbridge Corn Maze being open. As Micah Quinn explains, the corn maze has a special theme for maze goers when they head inside.
This goat perfectly captures the winding roads people will take at the Lethbridge Corn Maze.
So we have a 10-acre corn maze. There's 3 different mazes inside this maze, so you have a choice of doing all 3 or just one. There is a big maze that takes the longest, that's the hardest maze, that has no clues in it, and the idea is to find your way from the entrance to the tower in the middle. Then there is a kids maze, that's the smallest maze and is of course the easiest one. And we also have a trivia maze where you can answer questions this year about hockey, since we have a hockey theme. And if you answer the question right, it will send you the right way. If wrong, it sends you the wrong way, and eventually you come out by the tower again.
This year's theme for the corn maze is hockey, and the Lethbridge Hurricanes are featured with their team logo and a hockey player inside of the corn maze.
Yeah, we do have a hockey player cut out inside the maze, so you can walk through his legs and his body and his head. We have the logo cut out as well, and we have hockey pucks everywhere. So if you look from the top, you see all little pockets, or pucks, I guess. And they're on the ground, they are about 12 feet around.
Slingerland says there has been great reaction over the years to the corn maze.
Parents with children that were children themselves when they came out the first time, so that's neat to see. But we have a lot of positive reactions, great place outside, they say, and lots of things to do. So
the Lethbridge Corn Maze also has a petting zoo and goat snuggling sessions. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
It will soon become easier for pedestrians and cyclists to go from Coaldale to Lethbridge. As Ainsley O'Reilly explains, the Link Pathway is set to be created as a safer alternative to walking along the highway in Lethbridge County.
About 5 years ago, a group of cyclists had an idea, a 45-minute bike path that runs from Coaldale to Lethbridge, with a little something for everyone.
Being able to ride with my grandkids from Lethbridge to Coaldale on a pathway that follows through the irrigation canal through Lethbridge County and tells the story of agriculture.
The project's main benefit is safety. Cyclists and pedestrians can avoid the busy highway and take on a scenic route that not only keeps you active, but also educates.
Hopefully there'll be some interpretive stops along the way, that, some signs where they can say, oh, okay, this is a pivot gun, and irrigation has brought so much value to this area, or this is a canola field, or this is whatever, and people can maybe interact with the actual nature and agricultural elements in the rural setting and have a really good experience in exercising their mind and their body.
Interpretive storyboards, we want to tell the story of agriculture, we want to tell the story of the research station in this region, so it's educational component as well. So we think that's a big plus.
Phase 1 is expected to finish in the fall, and if you'd like to donate, you can visit linkpathway.org. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Many in Cambodia are living in a situation of poverty in urban and rural slums. Their prospects are bleak and the family unit is constantly under threat. Mercy Teams International is providing education and social work programs to support the poor and disadvantaged children.
I want to see the kids over here, they can get the better education and have school to study.
We support them, the school material, school uniform, school books, everything that they need to study.
The children all know the gospel, they know all the Bible stories and they tell them at home. And the parents hear them and they are happy.
Before I don't know God too, but after I know the I believe God.
It's a blessing that we see that people who are first themselves in our program, that they now are able to reach out to their own people.
When I was young, I come here and listen to MTI staff to share the gospel as well.
And so now, by faith, I pray to God, and now I see my community develop a lot.
Every day, individuals impacted by social injustices experience God's love. Their lives are being changed by Jesus, but thousands more remain out of reach.
Recapping one of our top news stories, if you're making your way to a City of Lethbridge facility, you will have to do with a face mask or a face shield. Jessica Deacon-Rogers is the program coordinator at the Helen Schuler Nature Center, and she says they will not be providing face masks for customers, but are encouraging nature lovers to bring their own. And a look at weekend weather. Today, sunny all day with clear skies overnight and a low of 10. Tomorrow, Monday, also sunny all day with a high of 29. In today's political climate, the gap between success and failure can be measured by how one handles the heat. Police, teachers, politicians are all under close examination. Joe Turnham is the author of Leadership Principles from the Bible and discusses what it takes to be a healthy leader. That interview is coming up next.
Throughout generations, people have probed the Holy Scriptures in search of meaning, purpose, solace, and forgiveness. It's also the ultimate source of timeless leadership principles. Joining me now to talk about it is Joe Turnham, the Economic Development Director for East Alabama, also author of the book Leading from Our Knees. Joe, welcome to Bridge City News.
It's great to be with you, Hal.
Now, do you think our recent challenges in both your country, in the U.S., and here in Canada have caused us to really look at leadership a little bit differently?
Without question. And I think, most people think successful leadership breeds peace and tranquility, but often it doesn't. And I think leading amidst chaos and destruction and pandemic and economic calamity is probably one of the greatest challenges of leadership. And I think it rattles the faith of those who count on their leaders to solve problems. And many times these problems are beyond the scope of simple solutions. And that's when we measure leadership with a little different yardstick, as you would say.
Or here in Canada, meter stick, that's right. Now, do we expect a little too much from those who lead us? Our mayors, our premiers, governors, like south of the border? What do you think?
Hal, I don't think we expect too much of them. I do think that perhaps we are maybe overconfident or over demanding in what we think the results can be from leadership. We talk about in the book a little bit that many times leadership is not making a good or a bad choice, but making the lesser choices that hurt the fewest or perhaps give us a chance for hope. And I think in these days that we have to allow leaders to make a few mistakes, because they will make mistakes, and many times they're making important measurements of do we reopen society at a risk of increasing infections, or do we let people lose jobs or get people sick? And these are not easy decisions for leaders. And I think that people sometimes can get cruel and partisan when leaders don't make decisions that they totally agree with, when in fact, if we're constituents of faith, that's when we need to ramp up prayers, and we need to hope that our leaders are getting good advice. In the scripture, leaders and kings and judges, they relied on prophets and advisors, and so I think that we have to look for our leaders to be getting the best advice that they can get in these days.
Joe, as the Economic Development Director for East Alabama, what have you seen in your present or past work with pastors, heads of state, or community leaders?
Well, that every leadership situation sometimes is situational. And I think a lot of leaders are in situations they've never been in before. I mean, in economic development, we have massive job losses. We have things are getting personal. Places with very high economic standards, people are going to food banks. So you have to recalculate. I think you look more internally. No person is left behind. You have to kind of recalibrate how you make decisions and how you prioritize decisions. I know economic developers are looking to, sometimes instead of recruiting, we have to rescue. And I think that's been a big focus. And I think as pastors or leaders of faith, we have to look at maybe not giving the solutions, but giving hope and getting in the right direction, the right frame of mind, so that we can come out the other end of this situation that we're in.
Hey, Joe, sometimes there are no right answers to complex challenges. How do effective leaders really navigate times of uncertainty?
Well, I think that good leaders exemplify humility that sometimes the issues are beyond them. They reach out for help. They admit mistakes. They're able to change direction. There's nothing wrong in leadership with changing directions. If a policy or perhaps the situations change, leaders can change. And I think asking those that follow you, whether you're an elected official or whether you're just a community leader, that, hey, we need to recalibrate today. We need to change directions. Maybe we got the data wrong. I think those are the kinds of changes that people appreciate leaders making in these days.
Biblical leaders were far from perfect, Joe. We all know that. Why does God often choose people who seem the least likely people to lead?
Well, it's throughout the scriptures. I mean, you look at, whether people were grinding grain or whether they were fishermen or whether they were tending sheep. I mean, God plucked out people of really modest means that never went to leadership school. And the leaders of today, sometimes their job is not to lead for a long time, but to lead through a certain situation. And I think leaders make mistakes. I mean, David was a man after the heart of God, but he numbered Israel. He committed adultery. He was an accessory even to murder, but he became a man after God's own heart. And the brothers of Joseph sold him into slavery and deprived their own flesh and blood of opportunity. And in the end, Joseph, when he's dying, looks around, he said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." So, I think leaders today, we need to pray for them, but I think also we need to allow good leaders to make some mistakes.
So in your opinion, then, what are some of the core attributes that make for a good leader?
Humility. Always look for humility. I think in leaders that have a heart of love and service, and you can discern that in the way that they conduct themselves. And we say here in the Deep South, where I'm from, that we want leaders that will be cross bearers and not crown wearers. That people that seek to do leadership because they know it's a duty, a lift. It oftentimes brings you under scrutiny and burdens. People that run for office or people that want the trappings of success or influence or that need the affirmation of power are usually people that I know will not last or be effective leaders. But a good thing is always humility and people that even have a sense of humor, that are able to be self-deprecating, because I think in leadership that it will overwhelm anyone. It doesn't matter if you're leading at the local or the national level. And I think that leaders also that seek the right advice, and leaders that have that heart for service. And I think it bleeds through everything they do and say.
You talk about being from the Deep South. I can hear that strong Southern accent. When I speak with you, can you hear my strong Canadian accent?
I can. It's very beautiful.
Okay. Why do you feel a real kinship with many of the characters and situations in the Bible?
I have been a political candidate. I've won some races, lost some races. I have been on the edge of disaster. I have met kings, queens, leaders, presidents over many administrations, and have been almost driven to my knees and in trying to understand leadership. And the Holy Spirit spoke to me to write this particular book because I think leadership is lonely. Leadership can destroy families. I've seen many people get destroyed financially, legally, and otherwise being in leadership. And so I felt like God wanted me to take these lessons of Scripture and offer them to people, because we're all leaders, and if we're people of faith, God will call us to leadership. Jonah didn't want to judge the people. Are you going to go to Nineveh or Tarshish? He didn't want to go in the right direction. But if you're a person of faith and God calls you to lead, he will pursue you until you answer that call. So, I think all of us at some point in faith will be called, whether it's to lead in our own families, which is the greatest leadership calling of anyone, to leading at in a network in Canada, or leading, a group of scouts. I mean, I think leadership, we're all blips of eternity. And I think, every action that we do will be measured in the fire of heaven. And I think that when we do things in the right heart and the right mind, and we love each other and we seek forgiveness, and I think in the United States today we're seeking to understand. Daniel in the Old Testament set his heart to understand, and I think that leaders today, whether they and you asked me a quality of a great leader, is leaders that want to understand and hear the opposing voices and bring people to the banquet that have never sat there and hear their perspective. And I think for us to heal, especially in America in these days, love, listening, learning, humility, finding places of where we can agree and de-escalate. That's when I think the Holy Spirit begins to work through situations.
Now, in each of your 365 entries, you provide a verse from the Bible and a takeaway lesson. Can you maybe cite an example or two?
Sure. I mean, the title of the book, Leading from Our Knees, is actually from the book of Luke, and it's Christ setting the example of leadership. And it was Christ went into a mountain one night to pray, and it says he prayed all night. And when he descended from the mountain, he chose his 12 apostles. Big decision he had to make. Son of God, creator of heaven and earth. What does he do? He prays over his decisions, and I think that's a big takeaway. And the book is a read through scriptures from Genesis to Revelation, and we can see from the prophets and the prophetesses and the disciples and apostles, but Christ himself. He knew when to cleanse the temple and when to be quiet in front of a Pilate. And he can show us in our leadership journeys today how to lead a holy life and a holy leadership journey.
Jesus provided the best example of leadership, Joe. What do you see as some of the qualities that Jesus had and demonstrated that we rarely see in our leaders today?
Well, Jesus knew what his mission was, and he knew that that was going to be a lonely leadership journey. He knew he was going to be tempted. Leaders are tempted, and he went to the temple. Satan probably didn't offer him. Satan probably said, "There'll be no more plagues. There'll be no more death. There'll be no more tears if you follow me." And in Christ, that was a hard decision, but he quoted the scriptures. He knew the scriptures, and I think Christ also he loved people into the fold, but he also knew that leadership. There's nothing wrong with telling people of faith that there will be suffering in your journey. I mean, I also believe in prosperity and that people of faith can be rewarded by following the word of God. But if we are called to leadership, we will suffer. And Christ was a suffering servant. And I think that, I have not seen nor ear heard, nor has ever entered into the heart of any man the things that God has prepared for those that love him. And I think that if we as people of faith in this earthly journey and this leadership journey that many of us are given, if we will keep our eyes on the eternal prize, and that if we will love others as we love ourselves, and we forgive 7 times 7, and that God will lift us up and he will use us in the things that we do. And Christ is the perfect example of that.
Joe, can a person be a good leader and yet be an unbeliever?
Absolutely. And, I think that there's certain principles of leadership. I mean, you don't have to be a person of faith necessarily to be humble or to be caring or to love. But we also understand that the kings and queens and princes and presidents are but the footstool of God. And many times, we leaders think that they're affecting the outcome of eternity, but God orders the steps. I think he orders the steps of the faithful. I think he orders the steps of unbelievers. He's the God of all circumstances. So, yeah, sure. I think that anyone is used in leadership, and people can have the right heart, not necessarily know the heart of God.
So what advice would you offer parents about their own role in leadership within their families?
Be available. Listen. Find times to put the electronics down, to do the simple things, to take out grandma's recipe. I think, in the quarantine here in the United States, I feel that it was God's gift to us to have to spend time with families. We're not on planes, trains, automobiles. We're forced to be together. That teenager that we can't have a discussion with, there are times that God's opened the door to have that walking down the street, or perhaps pierce the heart of a relative that is astray. And so, let's look at the tough times that we faced with the pandemic as almost opportunities. And I really believe even here in North America, where we're having great social disturbance, that it could be a setup for a huge spiritual awakening in our country, where love and forgiveness and understanding and a search for justice and mercy prevail all that we do. Just as the genocide in Rwanda forced people, Hutus and Tutsis, to sit down and to understand, how can this happen? How can we heal? How can we confess? How can we make it better? And, sometimes a setback is a setup for God to work great miracles.
So how do you hope readers will use your book, Leading from Our Knees, and what kind of takeaways will there be for non-leaders?
Well, I think they're timeless principles. You can read the Christian texts, and they, they're about, love and being accountable, and there are a lot of great principles there, just as there are in many faiths, in Buddhism and Islam and other religions. But I think if you look at it, that you will see that many of timeless principles that many generations have seen from great leaders are really in the Old and New Testaments of the Judeo-Christian texts.
Joe Turnham, author of the book, Leading from Our Knees, thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you, Al. God bless.
Caregivers are an essential part of everyday living for millions of Canadians. It's an intense, high-stress job with many rewarding moments. Today's guest has personal experience in this area, and he's cared for his beautiful wife, Gracie, who lives with severe disabilities for 33 plus years. He is the host of the weekly radio show, Hope for the Caregiver, president of Standing with Hope, and author of the book, Hope for the Caregiver. Peter Rosenberger, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you on today.
It is a treat to be with you all.
So, Peter, tell us, how many people are caregivers in the United States? And I believe you have statistics on Canada as well.
Well, it's a hard number to actually quantify, because a lot of times they talk about caregivers for those who are caring for the aging, senior citizens, and so forth, and that's about a 42 million number in America. But then you throw in special needs children, then you throw in mentally ill, then you throw in what I do on my show and what I talk about, alcoholics and addicts. That alcoholism and addiction is a chronic impairment. Even if you're in recovery, you're still dealing with that impairment. And anybody that's in the orbit of that individual, they know that individual is chronically impaired. And that wherever you find somebody who's chronically impaired, you're going to find a caregiver. So most experts in the United States are hovering around that 65 million range for the family caregiver in the United States. And in Canada, it's 8 to 11 million. It's hard to quantify that number because a lot of people don't identify as such. They don't think of themselves as a caregiver. I did a whole bit a couple of years ago with comedian Jeff Foxworthy on "You Might Be a Caregiver If." Wow. And if you've ever hooked up your wife's wheelchair to your dog just to see if it would work, you're probably a caregiver. I mean, that's, I was trying to do something that would kind of make people think of a little bit different about that. And it's okay to laugh at that, by the way. That's funny. And, right. if you get more than 6 Christmas cards from a doctor, you're probably a caregiver, So people don't think of themselves as such. And I'm helping reframe that conversation so people understand, why is this important? What am I doing here? Where's this going? And how do I do it better or safer?
Yeah. Now, you are a caregiver yourself. Let's talk about how you became one, and what has the journey been like for you?
Well, I became one when I said I do, and then I did, because my wife was hurt several years before I even met her. She had a really bad car wreck when she was a teenager, 17 years old. She had the world by the tail, and she was at school, at a music school in Nashville, Tennessee. I was at a different school in South Carolina at the time. Didn't know her. I transferred in as she was recuperating out of after the wreck. She came back, and friends said, "You got to meet this girl." And they said she's had a really bad wreck, but you guys are going to really hit it off. And she's the most spunky girl. You talked to her yesterday. She's got a personality as big as the state we live in, which is Montana, and beautiful, beautiful young gal. I mean, when I saw her, I mean, I was, don't take my word for it, Google her. I was Googling her that day. We didn't even have Google back then. and then I heard her sing, and I was a pianist. She's a singer, and it was all over at that point. And I knew I was going to take care of her. She had a limp. I saw some scars on her lower legs at first, and I, knew that she'd had some tough times, but had no concept of this, of what this meant. She'd had about 20 surgeries by the time I met her in the mid 80s. We got married, and the doctor said, look, if you guys are going to have kids, you have them when you're young. And so I went to her and I said, baby, doctor says we got to do this. And I got a prescription and everything. And I don't know if that's covered under Obamacare, but I bet you that's covered under Clinton care. So we had 2 children, but it accelerated some of that's funny, by the way. Y'all could laugh at that. That is just really funny. And y'all should laugh harder. But we had our sons, and after each son, she gave up one of her legs. It just accelerated the damage that was going on with her crushed limbs. The surgeries just kept mounting. To date that I could count, she's had 80 that I can count, and about another 150 smaller procedures. She's been treated by over 100 doctors in 12 different hospitals, and the bill is now well over 11 million. It just keeps growing. It's really kind of hard to keep track of all of it. I'm ballparking on that one, and that's a low ballpark. So, and she lives with severe pain all the time, and not known a day without it since Reagan was president in his first term. So that's a long time to deal with disability and challenges and heartache and frustration. And I've come to understand where the real battle is for the family caregiver. And it's and this is why I wrote the book. This is why I did the show. This is why I'm here with you today, because I understand how dark and discouraging those places can be when you're having a late night conversation with the ceiling fan, thinking, "Oh Lord, what am I going to do?" Mm-hmm. And so that's my story.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what you two have been through, and I can see that you use humor a lot, which is great. It's a great coping mechanism.
Well, I like to call it humor.
Yeah.
From your reaction, I was unclear if it was humor, but some things don't translate to Canada. I don't know. I don't know what that's all about.
Don't worry about it. Everyone will get it. Okay, so obviously you've got a lot of experience in this. What kind of advice can you give to those who might recognize that they could eventually become a caregiver, possibly to like aging parents? Is there anything that they can do to plan for it?
Yes. First off, if you love somebody, you will probably be a caregiver. If you live long enough, you're probably going to need one. So we all got a stake in this. It's a slow, creeping reality that we don't think about because we're always so busy right here in the here and now. But there's several things you can do to prepare for this. One of them is make sure your home is ready. When you're 50, 60 years old, don't go buy a 3-story home with a whole lot of stairs and the living part is way up on top. Don't do that. That's not a good idea. Make sure that you've got wider doorways, handicap accessible things. We're all one sprained ankle away from being in a tough situation in our own home. So let's go ahead and plan for that. Another thing is we've got to start taking care of ourselves and being good stewards, planning financially, planning physically with our bodies and things such as that, because it is coming. And then if you have a special needs child that comes in, all of a sudden you've brought this child into the world, there are things to prepare for that once that reality hits of what you can do. And but it all starts with the heart. And my message is for caregivers, healthy caregivers make better caregivers. Mm-hmm. And if you're morbidly obese, how is that going to help you take care of someone else? I see too many people who are really heavy pushing wheelchairs. And I know it. I wrote a book called 7 Caregiver Landmines. Excessive weight gain is one of those. I know. I got so big it took 2 dogs to bark at me. I know. I get it. We reach for the comfort food. That was funny, by the way, too. And it's, I got a million of those. I got so big I broke my family tree. I mean, I got big. And I understand that, but we've got to dial that back in. But the heavy weight that we really carry is not around our waist, it's around our heart. And so what I do is try to speak to that heart of the caregiver to let them know, number one, If you're in this situation right now, which there are millions of people in Canada dealing with this right now, you're in this situation now, hey, you know what? You didn't cause it, you can't cure it.
Yeah.
Okay? That's not yours to fix. You're a steward of this. Now, we don't talk about stewardship a lot in our society. I don't know what you guys do up there in Canada, but in America, we're $24 trillion in debt. Stewardship is clearly not on the top of mind of everybody in America. And we got people burning down our cities and everything else. Stewardship is not where our headspace is. But for caregivers, that's where it has to be. It really has to be for all of us, but I'm just going to focus on caregivers. We are stewards of somebody who is suffering or impaired or struggling. We are not owners or fixers. That's the big thing to keep in mind. You can't fix these things. I don't have any power over amputation. My wife's lost both legs, and her body is orthopedically a train wreck. I have no power over that, but I have a lot of power over being a jerk.
Absolutely. That's right.
I got a lot of power over that. And so that's where the battle is for us as caregivers. Can we live peacefully with things that we don't particularly like?
Right. Now, in your book, you use 3 positive words for high stress moments. They are wait, water, and walk. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, I never have to make amends for something I didn't say. You know, and sometimes we are so quick to blurt out some stuff and we want to jump into it. And for us as caregivers, you know, we're often required to learn to bite our tongue and enjoy the taste of blood, you know, because we want to pop off and say things. Just wait, just breathe, just take a deep breath, 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out, and calm yourself down. If that's not enough, drink some water. A lot of times we reach for sodas or high sugary drinks or whatever. Please, for all that is good in this world, avoid drinking things like Red Bull as a caregiver. It is not good for you. And we don't need to be so amped up. Our life is like this anyway. So drink some water, drink to think. We need to hydrate, and water gives us a chance to get our blood pressure down. Also, it fills our mouth with something besides words. We don't always have to go to every fight we get a ticket to. They're going to say things that or family members are going to say things, or doctors or nurses, or somebody's going to say to pastors, church people come up to you. Well, if you had enough faith, you wouldn't be going through this. Well, they don't say that to me anymore. I'm a 2nd degree black belt, so I usually know how to deal with that kind of nonsense. And I'm helping help people get better theology in this too, because we got really terrible theology when it comes to suffering. But drink. Okay, just drinks. Let me clarify. Drink water. Don't just clarify that.
Don't drink red wine, is what you're saying.
And the last thing is go for a walk if you need to. Wait, water, walk. You don't have to engage on all these things. It's okay to let some of this go.
That's interesting. It's good advice, too. Now, in your book, you also mentioned that there are 6 major impact areas affected by caregiving. What are they?
Well, you got your health, your emotions, your lifestyle, your profession, your money, and your endurance. You put it all together, it says, help me. And that's the cry for us as caregivers. All of these things are affected, but it starts with your heart. If your head and heart are squirrely, guess what? Your wallet will soon follow. If you are a train wreck in your darkest places in your heart, guess what? Your body will soon be that way too. It's just, and so if you can detangle this stuff in the heart, then we give every part of our living existence a fighting chance in dealing with these realities. So that's where I focus, but it's always about help me, not help us, not help her, help me. Because if I'm in a good place, my wife, who has all these things going on with her, has a fair shot at having some things help with her. But if I'm in a bad place, what's going to happen to her?
Yeah, it's almost like the caregiver needs a caregiver sometimes, right? It sounds like such a hard job.
I don't give a lot of instruction to my fellow caregivers on the air or anywhere else. What I try to give is reminders, because I think that's where our battle is. You can't tell me how to take care of my wife. I can't tell you how to take care of your family member, but we can remind each other of where safety is. In the Army, sometimes the leader is the guy that remembers where the Jeep is parked, you know, and we can remind each other of where safety is. Have you seen your doctor lately? Have you been to a counselor lately? When's the last time that you went for a walk.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's good advice for the caregivers. You also mentioned that there are 3 I's that every caregiver suffers from. What are they?
Every one of us lose their independence, we become isolated, and then we lose our identity. And that loss of identity is such a debilitating thing for family caregivers. Ask a caregiver, how are you doing? They say, well, she had a bad night, or I'm not doing, she had a bad night, or he's had a bad night, or we're not doing so well. They struggle with saying I. And so what I do on my show, when I have a caller that calls, it's a live show, and I always ask, how are you feeling? And it's amazing how many times they have to start and reposition again to be able to go back and say, I'm tired, I'm scared, I'm just hacked off. I don't know what to do. I don't care what comes after the word I. We can have a real conversation at that point, because then they start speaking, and they're probably stuttering, and tears will fill up their eyes. I've seen this over and over and over when they start speaking from their heart. But I try to give them enough space to be able to do that so that they can express what's going on there, get it all on the table. Now let's have a real conversation.
Oh, that's so interesting. And you're absolutely right. You do lose your identity, and you start to take on, almost project your personality onto the other person, or they get projected back onto you. That is so interesting. And it really drives home the fact of how much caregivers need other people in their lives too, right? Like counseling, and I would imagine they suffer from guilt a lot of times, and worry, and just all kinds of stresses.
Guilt really, really cripples caregivers.
Yeah.
I call it part of the fog of caregivers: fear, obligation, and guilt. And we get lost in the fog.
Yeah.
Parents feel guilty for bringing a child into this world with special needs. You feel guilty if your loved one can't get up and go and just stand up and take a shower. You feel guilty if you can get up and go and walk around the block and they can't. There are a lot of things to feel, not just sins that get great press. There are a lot of things to feel guilty about. You feel guilty if you just want to sit down and watch a television show uninterrupted for an hour.
Wow.
I try to help caregivers work through that a little bit and start using the word grace. I love that word grace. It's my favorite word in the English language. I married a woman named Grace, and I love the word grace. And we've got to learn how to apply that in our own lives so that we can live peacefully with very, very painful things.
Well, Peter Rosenberger, we are out of time, unfortunately. I would love to go on talking to you for hours and hours, and I'm sure you have so much to say on this topic. Thank you so much for joining us today, though.
Thanks for having me.
As our scientific abilities continue to advance, it is becoming possible to erase traumatic memories from our brains. Some believe this has great potential to help, but others, however, who see some ethical challenges with this. Joining me now to talk about it is Dr. Jeff Zwierig. He's an astrophysicist and a senior research scholar with Reasons to Believe. It's an organization which combines science together with faith. Jeff, welcome to BCN.
Enjoy being here. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. Is it actually possible now to wipe out traumatic memories with technology? And how does that process actually work?
Well, as I understand it, it's not possible to actually wipe out the memory, although we do seem to have the capacity to kind of remove some of the physiological effects. So, for example, if you had a traumatic memory and now you have trouble seeing dogs, if you will, or when dogs come around, you get anxious and very disturbed, you can actually do things to eliminate the response to that, even though you can't wipe out the memory, the traumatic experience with the dog.
Could this possibly help someone who's been sexually abused as a child in the past, or perhaps someone who was traumatized by a terrible car accident?
That, I think, is one of the very interesting outcomes of this research, is that it does look like we can actually help people who've been in traumatic experiences, and those traumatic experiences drive a lot of how their body responds to things, that we can actually help them dissociate the traumatic response and to be able to live a more healthy, more functional life that isn't driven by the traumatic experience.
Now, we form memories each and every day, Jeff, and I would venture to guess that these memories actually create part of our identity, our personality. So why do we really want to mess with them?
You know, that's a really good question, and I think we ought to be incredibly careful about how we do this, because how our mind works and what we think, it's a very complicated process and system, if you will. And so we do want to be very careful about how we go in and manipulate it, because we actually could cause a lot of unwanted side effects if we're not very careful how we do that.
Now, do memories help us decide what is morally right and what's wrong?
I think the standard or a moral code helps us decide what's right or wrong, but certainly our memories play into that because, anytime I'm deciding right or wrong, I don't want to go have to look up a book and remember the code. I actually have it in my mind so that I can remember it. And so if we want to make sure that we don't hinder our ability to recall things so that we can make those decisions in the moment rather than having to always go look things up, if you will.
Erasing a horrible abuse experience is one thing, but would people then use this to erase an embarrassing moment? Let's say they did something at a Christmas party that they're really not proud of?
I can't see that wouldn't be done. This seems like a technology that has great potential, but any technology that has great potential for good can also be used for detrimental purposes. And so if you can erase the bad effects of a traumatic experience in the past, you can also erase the inhibitions that would come from having done something embarrassing so that even though you remember the event, you wouldn't be embarrassed by it, if you will.
So what are some of the other potential drawbacks as you see them to erasing bad memories?
I think there's just a part of this that we need to be careful when we're working with a very complicated system. I do a lot of work on cars and other things, and I can imagine driving my car down the road and something happens and now there's something flapping inside the car and it's making a really annoying noise. And I could just take a very simplistic approach of saying, oh, let's just go remove that bolt and throw it away. It's rattling around. Well, that bolt probably did something else. And so if I don't fix it right, I'm going to cause other problems. And so that's what I see tinkering with memory. We've got to be very careful that we might be able to do something very good to help people that have very traumatic experiences. And I think that would be beneficial. But if we're just kind of tinkering around with people in kind of the ordinary aspects of life, we could very easily introduce some unwanted effects. And those are going to be very hard to predict ahead of time, simply because the human mind is such a complicated piece of equipment.
Do our traumatic memories maybe serve us in any way? In other words, do we need negative experiences to really learn from them?
It really does seem that. I know a lot of how I behave in a situation is informed by how things have happened in the past. There are things that I just instinctively, it's like my body responds and says, oh, be cautious, be careful here. And so what's happened in the past helps me navigate in the moment of the day, because there's kind of this idea that, well, I'll just kind of think logically and work through everything. And the reality of it is I don't have time to do all that in the moment. And so those past experiences where, hey, this worked well, ooh, this worked poorly, inform me and allow me to make those decisions that I'm confronted with each and every day. And I have to make a decision on the spur of the moment.
So how do we really learn from a bad relationship if we can't even remember it? I'm thinking we're going to be repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
Well, I think that's right. I'm kind of reminded of what the Bible says, that the Bible encourages us to think on the things that are honorable and true and pure and right, because as we do that, we're reinforcing that that's the way we're going to behave in the future. So if we don't have those bad memories, we can't learn from them to avoid them in the future. In the same way that having good experiences help inform us and make good choices in the future. And so I think we just want to be very careful about trying to remove memories. And I will make this comment. As of right now, I'm not aware of any ability to remove the memories are there. What we can do is dissociate some of the physiological effects of, say I'm terrified of spiders. I can remove the physiological fight or flight response that comes with that so that I can make a more informed decision, so that I can think and behave rationally in the moment. I can't actually get rid of the traumatic memory. It's still there. It's just how does it influence me in this particular instance?
Do we really need the past to give us proper perspective on the present? What are your thoughts?
I think the past is an incredibly important thing. It does help us understand what's going on in the moment. And with memories, again, I think there's this tendency to think of just the memory and that's all that's important. But there's a whole lot that goes into the memory. There's how your body responds. Did you think about it well? Did you think about it poorly? Have you gone back and rethought about it in light of the truth? All of those past things inform what I do each and every moment of every day. And so I think going in and tinkering with our memories and how we respond to them can have a lot of impact, unwanted or unintentional consequences of what may go on in my decision making each and every moment of each and every day.
You know, I heard that there were some scientists who believe that our memories are often interlocked, one memory together with other ones. So maybe potentially erasing one bad memory, would that affect some of the other ones?
I don't see how it couldn't. You know, again, our minds are very complicated, and what's going on in the brain when you have a memory is that there's new connections being formed, but those connections are connected to other things. And so if we're trying to destroy one connection or remove one memory, that's going to take those connections away, but that's going to have consequences throughout the brain. And again, a lot of the consequences of that we may not be able to predict ahead of time.
Apparently, even though a memory could potentially be erased, our subconsciousness will still retain the emotions that come along with that bad memory. Only now the context of those negative emotions are not there. Do you see that as potentially being problematic?
Yes, it is, because if you've now separated the emotions from the physiological response or the emotions from the event itself, you've got these emotions floating around, but you have no context for being able to process them. You know, I know some people know how to process emotions real well. I struggle with that. And a lot of what helps me process the emotions is being able to think through, remember the events, analyze what happened, and think rightly about it. Well, now if those are separated, I now have no longer any good way of processing those emotions to help them keep from driving my life and make and influence decisions, future decisions, in a detrimental way.
Now, considering that there's so much we do not yet know about how our memory works, is it best to not play God and just learn to cope with traumatic memories?
I think we need to be very careful, and I think to the extent you can cope with traumatic memories using just the tools, like I said, that the Bible talks about, thinking about what's true and honorable and right and pure and lovely, that would be ideal. But what I do see the advantage of this is that sometimes, you know, as try as I may, my head hurts and I can't get rid of it. And so I take aspirin. That helps me deal with the pain so that I can do things appropriately or properly. Well, I do think this sort of therapy would help people who are just paralyzed or unduly burdened by traumatic experiences. It will help them get past the traumatic experience so that they can deal with things in a more healthy way. And I think that's a good benefit, but we need to be careful about using it and thinking it's a miracle cure for every bad experience we've ever had.
Where do you think this field of science will actually go over the next 10 or 20 years?
I'm thinking it will help us understand how the mind actually works. Again, it's a very complicated process of how we think. What does consciousness mean? How do we understand past events? How do we think about future events? How do we feel? And how does that all integrate together? The more we can understand how that works, the more we can actually use that information to help and benefit people. So rather than kind of having it be a black box where I know if I put this little drug in, it does this, the more we understand that process, the better we're going to be able to use it to help people who desperately need the help.
You know, I'm kind of thinking at the same time, instead of removing some of those potential memories, how about implanting some fake memories, like Total Recall, that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, redone, I think, with Colin Farrell. How about we plant in a memory of I was in a tropical vacation somewhere, you know, instead of actually paying the big bucks to go there?
Well, yeah, it does seem like there's some capacity to do that. And people who've been involved in this research can show that you can actually convince people they were involved in committing a crime that they didn't actually commit. And so there are techniques and processes, even without using the drugs, brain function inhibiting drugs, that you can use to do that. And so we'd like to think, oh, if I just have all these memories of idyllic environments, that'll be great. But the reality of it is you've got these memories that aren't connected with what actually happened. And anytime we obscure the way things really work, that often works to our detriment. And so while it may seem like it'd be great and a good time, again, that's almost certainly going to have negative consequences later.
Dr. Jeff Zweerink is an astrophysicist and a senior researcher scholar with Reasons to Believe. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.